there is a God, but do I believe that the church is representing that God?
Abraham's question. To what degree do you think this is a like historical issue? Because like I'm trying to think like what we have so many positive feedback loops now between science and the scientific community, making it less and less oriented towards faith and talks about faith or anything around that. Likewise, I think there's a healthy amount of talk in Christian groups, at least, I don't know about other religions, that are anti-science and are openly anti-science, and like not even in any sort of nuanced way, but just science is bad and is trying to lead people away from faith.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to that psychological entrenchment and that polarization again, right? And I think it's happening on both sides. Um, and yeah, I think
Do you
it's
think that started, and is it wholly a historical issue? Is there something still developing in the modern culture that's making this worse? Because like we do see these numbers of I mean the overall numbers of religious people in the Western societies is lowering, I believe.
yep.
In scientific communities, it's lowering at an exponential rate relative to that over the last 20 years or so. Is that something that's just happening now, or is that some result of history, or is that some combination? I'm sure it's some combination, but would you blame one more than the other, or?
I think it's a little bit of everything. So I think like herd behavior comes into it for sure, and you become like the people that you surround yourself with. Like we know there's so much evidence of that. Um, but also like this idea of polarization, I think, is just weeding out that middle ground that maybe um, never really was of the faith. And because I think, I mean, I like to think that the numbers were higher and there was genuine faith, but there could also be that fact that like those marginal affiliates that um, were never really wholehearted about the faith are just kind of getting revealed and having to choose a side, right?
Or do you think
Um,
that they were like really in the middle? Like, do you think like they were like like your middle voters, and they were open to being convinced by either side, and maybe just faith is doing a bad job of making their
yeah,
case relative to science? I don't know. Like, because science is, you're right, speaking in a more they're not always completely understandable, but it's a newer language. It's probably a language that's more associated with what the kids in school these days are hearing.
mhm.
So maybe that's part of why they're just able to make that argument much better. And that's why anybody in the middle tends to lean that way after some exposure.
Yeah, and I think too, like we've done. I mean, I think regardless, there will always be people that walk away from the faith in that. But like, in terms of my own experience here and whatnot, like I think we do a poor job of getting to the heart of what the faith is. And we make it very political. We make it very like church politics is a whole issue in and of itself, and we make it very. It can be more about what each religious group thinks rather than like coming back to that heart of love that Jesus had for the people around him, and that love of God. It becomes about, do you believe the right doctrine? Do you believe the wrong doctrine? And we have all these like fragmented denominations who are fighting with each other in and of themselves, and not all of them, but like like you get that a lot where churches are like, well, they don't believe this, or like they don't agree with us on this, so they're not true Christians. Like that, the fact that that is even a statement that gets thrown around, true Christians, you're either Christian or you're not. There's no like this whole we're like better Christians than these other Christians is so problematic. And I think people just get tired of fighting, and like it's not a representation of who Christ was, so they look at that and go, this isn't the God that I serve. And if this isn't the God that I serve, does that God even exist? And it becomes that questioning that then sometimes lands them to believe no. Or like for myself, it was like, I believe there is a God, but do I believe that the church is representing that God? And when you decide no, you end up stepping away from Christianity um, because we're not always the best representation of who God is and the life of Christ. Like we're supposed to be emulating that, but do we always? And of course, we're always going to get it a little bit wrong. We're human, but I think that um, because we had that position in society for so long, where we were kind of privileged, and Christianity was just expected within Western society for many years, we've kind of gotten away from the heart of it, I think, a bit. And,
What occurs to me, especially as we're talking about these people who were previously maybe in the middle, they weren't extremely one way or the other, and things seem to be polarizing right now, generally polarizing people away from Christianity or faiths. It occurs to me, like, what's the easier path for people? Where will they be more accepted based on? These are people who probably are having a hard time in their faith if they were in the middle. They maybe haven't been doing everything right. If they try to get back in touch with their faith, how much resistance or blowback are they going to be receiving from a church community? And how much are they going to be receiving from choosing to unadopt their faith and go hang out with their friends who will love them no matter what? And why is that the non-Christian people? And how sad is that?
Yeah, it's really sad and really disappointing. But I know, like, for me, coming back to the faith too, and like I had a good support group, and like I appreciate all of them, but there is that level of, oh, you have to rebuild because like what you're doing is wrong, and like that you just need acceptance and that love, and it's not always what you get. And like I ended up coming back because I didn't see another option, and so those things kind of didn't really impact me. But
think about basic incentive structures. You're looking across, like if you're an economist and you're trying to see, like, okay, we're trying to optimize for X or Y. The current situation looks like you're trying to optimize away from faith, because the hardest path for people to take is to go back. The easy path is to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, more people are going to lean towards going away.
Yeah.
You made it really hard to go back. Why? Why are you surprised that? Why is the faith community surprised that it's lowering?
And then and like when you look at the story of the prodigal son, and like the father just running out, he doesn't ask for he doesn't ask him to ask for forgiveness. He doesn't expect anything.
Grovel, no.
He just embraces his son and is like, hey, you're back. And I mean, for all he knew, he didn't know why the son was heading home. He could have been heading home to ask for more money. Like, and meanwhile, as Christians, when people come back, we're like,
oh, it's time to judge. Put your judge pants on.
Yeah, exactly. And like, oh, you got to get your life in order. And like, oh, we love you, but this is what you need to do in order to take those steps to regrow and get everything back to order. Whereas, like,
you to help or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And
it really is sad. And I think like these incentives sort of style structures that I'm talking about, I think that's another problem relating to science and faith as well, is you have a lot of kids today growing up trying to reconcile these two things.
Mm-hmm.
And if the church just says that science is evil, it's not really giving people the right context to frame, they make it look like a decision, which science is at fault for a little bit as well. And they're, saying, well, what evidence do you have for X or Y? And they don't really present the evidence for the Bible. So they just say, oh, what evidence do you have? None? Well, I'm not going to tell you any, but, make a decision. Faith is just as bad in saying that science is just evil.
And for sure. And
it makes people make this stupid choice between science and faith when there's no reason to be doing this.
Exactly. And I think the main problem with that too is like Christians are supposed to have that third option, right? That third way. Like when Jesus came, he completely shook everything up and took a path nobody expected. He didn't take like the side of the underdogs really, and he didn't take the side of power. Like he created a whole new thing. And if we are to emulate that in our own lives, we should we shouldn't expect it of the scientific community to say, hey, we can do both. It should be the Christians to take that step and say, actually, science reflects God and reflects the beauty and majesty of God and like his creation. And it should be, I think it's our responsibility personally to make that step and to say it can be both.
Well, I think at the very least, if we're not the ones who are going to take responsibility, do you expect them to? Because otherwise nothing's going to change. If you want things
Exactly.
to change, you have to be the ones to do something.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, and I think to your point about kids too, a lot of kids now are actually being raised in secular environments. Um, so they might not even hear stories of the faith, whereas before, like 20 years ago, people, even if you didn't attend church, you knew the stories of like Jonah, you knew the story of Adam and Eve. You might not have fully understood like how it makes sense in a faith context, but you knew it. It was around. We're getting really far away from that. But again, Christians still have that interpretation that we have this place of privilege where if we mention these stories, people should know what they are. Like even me in this podcast, I've mentioned how many without actually explaining what they are or using accessible language for people who don't know what they are. And this is a little different because it's meant to be a faith podcast, but like we're doing that in the context of outreach as well, which doesn't make any sense because again, it comes down to that inaccessible language. And if you're outreaching to someone being like, oh, well, you know, like Adam and Eve, like they don't know who those people are anymore. You can't do that. We have to switch up our whole approach and just like shake it up and start something completely new because that's not going to work anymore. Um, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, between the like kids' environment at school, the way science is presenting faith is bad, but obviously we can't do anything about that from the side of faith. Um, but we're really incentivizing, doing everything we can to incentivize people away from faith, and it's you know maybe good because the people who are still around are the ones who have put through every single incentive against it. But like, man, that's not the goal. You're not trying to just see who's the hardest. That's uh, yeah.
Yeah.
There needs to be some there. I don't know what the answer is though. When things are so big and institutional, it just becomes so daunting to try to touch.